Hey guys, this is Courtney back from Willow's Bloom, and I am super excited to give you this video, which is actually quite close to my heart. It is about Saturn and Pisces, which I'm sure you know because you've read the title. But I natally have Saturn and Pisces. So I'm going through my Saturn return, and my friend Christina and I have been talking about doing this video together for months now. And we're super excited to bring you this because we've both gone through our Saturn returns and we have a lot to share. So welcome. Christina, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Christina and I'm a professional astrologer and I just completed my Saturn return. So I have Saturn in Aquarius. And so I'm super excited to talk to you guys all today about Saturn return and kind of what to expect if you have Saturn in Pisces.
Awesome. So yes, she's kind of had the full cycle of what it feels like to have Saturn move through the entire sign of where Saturn is. And I think that is going to give us like the mature view, like what it looks like at the end. And I'm right in the thick of it. So Saturn, my natal Saturn's at 0 Pisces. Right now, Saturn's at 1 degrees of Pisces. So I'm excited to kind of talk about what I've been feeling. And also, we're going to go through all of the signs. So definitely make sure you stay tuned for that. So I guess just talking about when did Saturn ingress into Pisces? That happened back on March 7th. And Saturn stays in a sign for 2.5 years. So we'll be there until February 13th of 2026. And what would you describe Saturn energy as and like Pisces energy and then combining them?
Yeah, so Saturn and Pisces is kind of like the biggest contradiction because Saturn is all about restrictions and boundaries and delays and hard work. And then Pisces is, boundless. It is the sign that kind of encompasses all 12 signs. And so Pisces doesn't really have boundaries. So when you pair Saturn, which is all about creating boundaries and structure, with a sign that is mutable and, kind of just very open, it's going to be interesting. I'm honestly really interested to see how this plays out for everyone. My partner has Saturn in Pisces. So it's really funny. Like I just can finish my Saturn return, and now it's like I feel like I'm kind of gonna go through another Saturn return, like with him. So it will just be really interesting to see. But I do think that boundaries are going to be a big theme, because I think it's going to be really important to set those in place. Because if you don't, I think there could be a lot of chaos coming in. So
Yeah. So, as somebody who has this placement, I have really struggled with that element of the contradiction because it falls in my 6th house, which is a very everyday kind of house where you feel that in your routine, in the way that your body functions, in the way that your work operates. And I've felt like I've always struggled with this part of me that is very fluid and go with the flow, which is Piscean by nature, like taking things as they come, surrendering to the process of life, trusting, having faith. And then Saturn, which wants to have control. It wants to kind of manipulate the outcome, not in terms of like mental manipulation, but almost by force, by trying really hard. And I felt like I've kind of struggled with one foot in between both worlds. And I think that many of us, as Saturn goes into Pisces, will have that similar experience of what does it feel like to try to gain control over something uncontrollable. And it's like going out into the ocean and there's these big, massive waves, but you're this little boat on there, like trying to sustain your life. You don't have control over the ocean, but you have control over that boat and what choices you make there. And how likely you are or are not to survive. And I think Pisces, it's just such a big collective energy. It does feel like the ocean. It's ruled by Neptune, which is obviously the planet in charge of the ocean. And so it does have this kind of vastness that can swallow us up. And I think Saturn wants to have more, like you said, the boundaries to feel like, okay, this is my body. This is what separates us. These are like the lines and distinctions and definitions. And then Pisces kind of swallows you into this existential drift where it's like you could be anything and you're part of everything. You feel everybody's energy. And it's this weird contradiction, as you said, to kind of have a foot in both of those realms.
yeah, I think, and I do think for Saturn and Pisces natives, it will be a big shift compared to Saturn and Aquarius, because obviously Aquarius is Saturn ruled, or partially Saturn ruled. And so I feel like in that regard, like almost if you had Capricorn, Saturn in Capricorn or Saturn in Aquarius, you almost have a little bit more support. And so with Saturn and Pisces, I think it's going to kind of be about realizing that we don't really have control. And so, but that's part of why the boundaries are really important. And also, I think we'll see a huge push for connecting to our spirituality more and our intuition. And I think it's going to be a big pull for spiritual entrepreneurs and just really connecting to your internal wisdom within to really help you navigate and guide you throughout this time.
It's so funny that you say that, because I asked Spirit, what are some things that you would want to bring up today? And I pulled the Magician card, which has a lot to do with our compass in this specific deck. It's not the tarot. And it's talking about how we are all these manifestors and we have all this expansion. But one of the things that it was saying was to have a clear vision and a clear why and connecting to our soul. So that's like the very strong spiritual side of entrepreneurship, which you were mentioning. And not to get lost in the status, the money, the vanity that it's saying. And I feel like it's really drawing us towards moving from empty intentions or intentions that we actually realized didn't fulfill our soul into intentions that go beyond this lifetime, that go beyond the material world, which Saturn usually likes to deal with, and goes a lot further. And so it's using, I feel like, Saturn's energy and ability to work in the material world to push beyond those limits and feel into what it is that we desire as a collective in terms of advancing everybody, because it's a very compassionate sign that really wants to help those who are misfortunate, who are really the underdogs, who haven't had a voice, haven't had a say, especially as Saturn has been in its own sign of Capricorn and Aquarius, where you think it would be a lot about equality, but it really didn't feel that much to me. It felt very much the same kind of materialistic, same capitalism focus. I feel like we're moving now into more of a collective focus and a soul focus that will help us connect more with our purpose. Like, why are we even here? And so I think that we can manifest really amazing things, but I also feel like the people who have that stronger soul-centered why will be the ones that benefit the most from this type of transit, because they won't maybe have as many harsh lessons around what it looks like to have to go through a very typical Saturn Pisces energy, which is loss, because Saturn and Pisces both have to do with endings, especially loss of control, loss of the things that you've maybe put too much stock in or identified in that don't align with you as a soul. And I think the people who are really on that materialistic path, they're going to start to deteriorate a little bit and have to face some of these deeper, dark kind of soul lessons around what have I invested so much of my life energy into. And the people who are more of the spiritual entrepreneurs, I think are going to start to maybe gain some traction. And I feel like we can already kind of see that with some of these venture capitalist banks going under and things really shifting in terms of the traditional banking world. And I'd be curious to see how that kind of expands, especially as Pluto's moving into Aquarius as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting too to me that you brought this up, because I just had a client actually yesterday that has Saturn in Pisces, and they're going through their second Saturn return. And I think it's interesting because I've had so many clients recently that are also mutable signs. I'm Gemini, Sun, Sag Moon, Sag Rising. So I find that like I get a lot of clients that are going through similar experiences as me. And anyway, so she was someone who had Saturn in Pisces in her fifth house. And I was asking her about her creativity. And it was something that she had honestly, truly never even, like I asked her a specific question of like, do you have creative ideas or projects that you're working on? And she had never even contemplated it. And so the reason I'm bringing that up is because I think it's super important to do your homework during Saturn return, because if you don't, when you come to your second Saturn return, it's like that is when it really, it's like you're going to feel it even more. So I think it's really cool that this this generation coming into their Saturn return, you know, it's I guess it's still millennials, but kind of on the cusp of Gen Z as well, or maybe some later Gen Zs. But if you have Neptune in Capricorn, that to me is like the epitome of like a spiritual entrepreneur. And it's like learning how to create structure in something that you're really passionate about and then building that into something that, you know, can be sustainable. And so it's, I think millennials in that regard, like we are so drawn to spirituality, and a lot of us have been really wanting to kind of get away from the corporate world and to do things that we're really passionate about. So I'm excited because I think that the natives with Saturn and Pisces, you guys are going to feel that even more. And so really, guys, like now is the time. If you are wanting to do anything with spirituality, astrology, occultism, tarot, like get on it and start putting yourself out there, because I think a lot of times we think like, oh, well, there's so many astrologers already, but it's like, you know, we need so many more people to be in this field so that we can make it more mainstream and make it more approachable and accessible. And so I think that like it's going to be it's a huge call. So if you're feeling called to it, like now is the time. And I definitely recommend, if you're about to go through your Saturn return, to me, this is like the best time to get a reading to prepare yourself, because I wish I had someone. I have been into astrology since about 2014, but I didn't start studying it professionally until the beginning of my Saturn return. And I wish I had had more guidance. So, you know, now is the time to really dive into that.
Absolutely. And I think just kind of adding on to that, diving also into what is your spiritual life and what are your practices and rituals, if you have those. And maybe you start to change your belief systems on things. Maybe you've been too strict or too rigid, or maybe you haven't had enough effort into that area of your life. And I think Pisces is not only like our mental health, but it has a lot to do with our spiritual health as well. And I think wherever Saturn is, it's asking us to become accountable and responsible. So I think the level of lack of integrity within the spiritual community, or um, lack of authenticity that could exist within the spiritual community, the spiritual bypassing. I think we've already kind of start to see some light shed into those areas, especially like, oh, just be optimistic and everything's going to be fine. I think Saturn moving into Pisces, not only does it ask you to kind of create your own belief systems, be accountable for that, but also for the spiritual community in general. If there have been areas where we're just kind of ignoring reality, Saturn moving into Pisces is going to ask us to be spiritual or religious and look at reality at the same time. And that's sometimes not the thing that Pisces wants to do. So Pisces wants to feel connected to the divine. And part of that is often removing oneself from the material world, from the harshness of the material world and the suffering of people around you. It's like you're either really, really aware of it and it gets you down and it disturbs your mental health, or you want to avoid it. I mean, it doesn't have to be like those two extremes, but it can tend to do that. And Saturn coming in here is going to really draw our attention to those areas. And then also a lot to, I think, mental health as well, like pharmaceuticals, basically all the ways that we kind of take care of our spiritual and mental being and emotional being as well, because it is a water sign. And I think that actually the harmful effects of social media are going to become, I mean, they're already really talked about, but I think it's going to become something that is possibly more of a pressing concern, especially with younger generations who might be born during this time. Yeah, I guess there's a lot to say there, but that's kind of a lot of topics in one if you want to go off any of that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to know that this is going to feel like a very sobering time, I think, for a lot of people. And so, especially with like, you know, I think you will be faced with acknowledging addiction or like escapism, you know, if you are really like just allowing yourself to kind of dissolve into like Netflix or drinking or smoking, any of those kind of things, whatever your personal vice is. And it's not to say that you can't, that you have to like completely be sober. I don't think that that's essentially totally necessary, but having conscious, conscious cannabis use or being conscious of what you're doing and how you are choosing to escape, because I
And
think that
why?
why, yeah, because I feel like if you allow yourself to just not pay attention to any of those things, it's going to be you might start to feel like you are really needing it or like using those vices to an extreme level. And so if you have been contemplating, creating more of a conscious practice with, your vices, whatever they are, I think now is really the time to do it, because wherever you are in your Saturn cycle, it's like when you hit your exact degree, that's when you're going to feel it the most. So if you have a little bit more time and you're like, oh, well, my Saturn is at 24 degrees and like I'm not even there yet, it's better to prepare than to just wait. Take it from me, like who's gone through it, because you think that you might feel like you're done, but I'm telling you, and at least in my personal opinion, I really feel like your Saturn return is not just the exact transit. Like if you're at 0 degrees when it hits zero, to me, it's the whole experience, like the entire time that Saturn is going to be in Pisces, you will go through a series of ups and downs. And I'm a really firm believer in not using astrology to create fear. I don't subscribe to like the fear mongering astrology. I'm also Sag Moon, Sag Rising, so maybe that's just like my positive nature. But I'm not going to lie to you guys at all. Like Saturn return is a very challenging time in your life, and you will go through hard, so many hard moments, but the rewards that you will gain when you put in the effort, it's amazing. So yeah, I mean, I don't like to like scare anyone, but it is a time where you really have to like buckle up and get serious, because it's just a time of maturity and becoming a true adult.
Yeah. And I think it's all about like how hard it is really depends on your chart. It depends on your past actions. It's a very karmic, time oriented planet. So it is very much like what goes around comes around. It just might have a little bit of a delay. And it's just more pressure that's put on you. And I've personally kind of felt that this year building up to my Saturn return, even more so. It's 1 degree, so it just passed it. But I felt it even more so like the months prior, where that tension kind of builds. And I started to think about, is this a partner that I want to be with long term? Do I want to have children? Do I want to live in this house forever? Like, do I want to be somebody who has this as my identity? Do I need to make certain changes? And the things that, especially Saturn and Pisces, which is very much related, Pisces can be related to avoidance. The things that I have swept under the rug are coming around with a vengeance, and not in a negative way, not in a way that's going to bring me down, because I'm deciding to view it from a place of feeling ready. Which I think Saturn also creates that feeling of like, I'm ready to tackle this really big thing in my life that maybe I wasn't mature enough to tackle before. And so I think that's why it can feel so intense or so scary, is like, you're finally looking at and changing things that you've come into this lifetime deciding to change, and those areas in particular are hard for you. So for me, that's a lot around routine, how I manage my money, how I manage my health. And I've noticed a lot that things have started to shift these last few months, and I've really kind of stepped up a lot to the plate. And I've been really grateful for that. But I also have a Capricorn moon. So that's something I'm like receiving with gratitude. And maybe if your chart's really different, that might be something that intimidates you. It's gonna be very personal. But ultimately, I feel like kind of what you're saying, or what we're both saying, is the things that have been swept under the rug are coming out to be looked at, to engage with, to do something about in terms of responsibility. Something else that I want to add though is that one of the things that it took me a really long time to learn was that a lot of what we want to do with Saturn is kind of strong arm the situation. We want to like overcome and be forceful, or like have the power over it. But Saturn and Pisces it's more like feminine power, where you're not necessarily coming in here with like, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and everything is going to go as planned. And we're going to have to do this, this, this. And it's like, there is some element of accountability, responsibility, taking action, which is always Saturn. But then there's also the element of how do I feel? How does this operate in my life? What are the unknowns that's happening here? How do I stay in touch with my spiritual side or my soul as I'm doing these activities, so it's not disconnecting from the deeper purpose, so that I'm not losing myself in the process of pursuing this thing, or, you know, hurting myself in that process, which I think Saturn can sometimes do when we're so like driven towards a specific material goal. And I think that's why we've seen this interesting trend on TikTok where we went from how to be that girl, which is like, oh, somebody who gets up at 6 a.m., somebody who eats 3 cornflakes and works out for 6 hours, and then like an avocado. And it's just like this, I mean, it's something really aspiring. And I do aspire to have that, of course. But then there's also this new emerging trend of, oh, how to live the soft life, or I don't dream of labor. And people talking about this on their videos of how to have more of this kind of receptive, feminine, gentle way of moving through life, or certain hobbies and things that are restorative, that are compassionate with the soul, and don't just push past being tired and ignore what your needs are. And I think Saturn and Pisces is this interesting blend in between. And before, I would always try to force myself and get really angry at myself for not making certain changes, for not being more routine, for not being more disciplined, until I realized that it was actually only through compassion with myself, unconditional love, unconditional acceptance, that I actually started to make that progress that I was looking for, and was actually able to find a routine that was maybe a little bit more fluid, or had a little bit more self-care in there. But it was like, that's the routine that I was able to be more consistent with, because it involved a lot more of that kind of higher level self-love perspective that I feel like Pisces truly wants from us. So yeah, I feel like that nuance there is super important about not just work and discipline, but how are we loving ourselves in the process of that? And how are we being soft and hard at the same time?
Yeah, totally. To kind of touch back on just a few things that you mentioned, speaking of the feminine, I think another good tip that I have for everyone with Saturn return is to look at your progressed moon. That's something that I actually didn't look into until like maybe midway into my Saturn return. I wish I had, because it will definitely have a strong influence on how you in particular like really experience it. And like you said earlier too about kind of like how to know, for some people it's going to be much more challenging. And for me, for example, like I had Saturn square Pluto, so that alone was like a huge, influence. And so I think like for the for people that have Saturn in Pisces, I think the mutable signs specifically are going to be hit probably the hardest with your Saturn return. So those are kind of just things to look into as well. But yeah, I mean, I think that finding the balance really is so key. And especially with spirituality, like I had a meditation practice that I had kept going for almost like 250 days. And it was almost like militant. And when I look back on it, I stopped practicing one day, and then I literally didn't continue my meditation practice for like 2 years. And I think it was because I was so militant about it. So I really do think with Saturn and Pisces, it is about finding that balance, that feminine and masculine energy, that flow, because if you do anything to one extreme, you're just everything is a pendulum. So you're gonna swing in the opposite direction. So that can be with diet, with lifestyle, with friends, socializing, drinking, whatever it is. Like, I really do think that this transit is going to be about finding the balance, because yeah, like I said, you'll just swing into the other direction if you go too extreme.
Yes, I love that. That's so true. And I've noticed that so much in my life recently, like how people will come on so strongly when they're first learning something, like when they first learn, like for example, like if you just got into meditation for the first time and they realize it's like their first time in their life realizing how important that is. It's like this really big clicking moment, and you just go 0 to 100 because it's something new. And then you go to the opposite end, yeah. Anyway, I think that's super important. Another thing that I think about with this is I think that there could be issues around like faith, hope, trust, surrender, control, dreams, like actual dreams, and then like our hopes as well. I think we could also have very interesting things come up around faith, like as a religion or spiritual beliefs or dogma. I think Saturn coming in here can oftentimes challenge where we may have felt like we weren't questioning things before. Or, I mean, for me, with Saturn and Pisces natally, I've kind of always had this weird thing with faith where, on one hand, I have a lot of it. And on the other hand, I can go into moments of despair. And I think this is because of certain nuances in my chart. But Saturn and Pisces can kind of have that feeling. And we are moving into, a recession as it's looking, and some really big changes to the way that life kind of moves forward after this kind of reset that we've had. And I think in many ways, especially as Pluto moves into Aquarius and technology picks up, there's a lot of like the fear of the unknown and all this future stuff. And sometimes it can make us at times feel like it's hard to have a lot of faith and hope in humanity or in the future or in the universe taking care of us. And I say that because Saturn brings a certain degree of like challenge or seriousness to whatever sign it's in. And Pisces is a sign most associated with Christianity and any religions really, but especially Christianity. And so I feel like that maybe Christianity could come under fire, or there could be some changes where some people feel like they're adding in more of a spiritual element to not just be religious. Like it could take many different faces. I don't want to make a specific prediction, but I think that people in general might have their faith tested and strengthened. I think ultimately Saturn moves into a sign to help us see where we maybe, again, weren't questioning things, so we can solidify the foundation there and feel more certain of ourselves. But you have to do that by first asking, is this what I want? Is this what I feel? Is this right for me? And that could go into any area of your life, wherever you do have Pisces. Maybe having faith and trust in that area of your life is something that you've maybe taken for granted. And you realize this year, like, actually, maybe things aren't the way I thought they were. I don't know. That's just like a specific. Yeah. Anyway, I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry,
said about the religion piece. I think that, I'm hopeful that perhaps this transit will actually bring us closer together through religion and spirituality, instead of the like, just constant arguments, or like,
Mhm.
just looking into specific pieces of religion and people are like, I'll take this or take that, but instead just kind of like understanding that we are all interconnected, and no matter how you view God or divinity or whatever source, whatever you want to call it, realizing that we are all one and connected. And so I'm hoping that, if we do see certain, just intense situations or like issues come up, especially with like water, I think that will be a huge theme. We've already seen it. I mean, we don't even need to get into that, but like the Ohio thing, like, I mean, it's like, I think we'll start to see a lot of crisis around water. But I think also I'm hopeful that that will actually bring us closer together as a collective. And especially with Pluto moving into Aquarius, like starting to take down the system and coming together to unite in order to do that. So I feel like we're at the point where it's almost essential if we want to be more independent and have freedom in the world that we live in now. So I think I'm hopeful that at least people will begin to come together through spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, kind of like I was saying before, I think everything is initially challenged when it first moves into that sign. You have a crisis with water, or you have maybe something happen in your personal life that makes you question, how stable things are, how much faith you have in life, or your spiritual beliefs get tested in some way. And then at some point throughout this process, you hit the middle and the end, and you kind of realize the solutions, or you work out what was going wrong. And I do think it's going to help bring us together. And especially with Pluto moving into Aquarius, come up with more technological solutions as well for things that have created this disparity, for things that have made it okay to solve problems like how they did with what happened in Ohio in a way that's actually harming people. And I think it's gonna, my hope is that it will, again, create more solutions so that it is something that's going to help everybody. Um, and yeah, actually just wanted to kind of mention as well that one of the last times we had Saturn and Pisces was, this wasn't the last time, but the previous one before that was in 1935 to 37. If you guys know, if you're a historian buff or just know history at all, then you know that this was a time when Nazi Germany was kind of in its swing. So we can kind of see here how Saturn can come into a sign and then distort the collective belief system and can create fears. And this is something to be really aware of. And I feel like we, given what has already happened these last few years, I feel like we're coming out of that. But I think it's just important to know Pisces energy does represent the collective unconscious. So if you can think about if we all had like spiritual brains kind of with tethered and just floating above us, and they're all collected and unified together. And from this, there's like ideas that swirl around in there and they get sent to one person to another or to all of us. And we feel that energy of what everyone else is going through, what everyone else is thinking and feeling. And so when Saturn moves into that sign, which is inherently a planet associated with fear, associated with restrictions and all of those challenges, you can see how there could be certain fears implanted that are felt on this mass scale, which is why I think also the whole Nazi Germany propaganda was really able to go into such full bloom because of that energy. It was like growing in the collective. And so I think that this can be used for the benefit as well. Like we can take something that once gave us fear or that as a collective is scary, like having like water that isn't clean. I don't know if you guys have heard of forever plastics, or I don't know if that's the name, but it's like some chemical that never breaks down. And so it's in many of our water systems and things that we might literally not ever be able to avoid if we can't filter it out and we can't break it down physically. So I really do feel like there are going to be like legitimate fears that could be impregnated into the unconscious of the collective. But I also think it's our opportunity to be really aware of that and aware of how to create solutions and positive thinking. Because again, this is a collective. It's like a hive mind. If we are thinking more positively, it does impact our neighbors. So I think a lot of Pisces energy is not only how can we help everybody, but also how can we take care of ourselves, which is kind of the polarity with Virgo, opposite Pisces. How do we manage our own life, our own energy, our own emotions, our mind, and our optimism so that it actually helps the balance out the collective, put more positive energy into that so that it feels like we have more of a solution-oriented mindset.
Yeah, totally. And I think that doing the shadow work during this transit is going to be huge. I think that we could see an uptick in depression or anxiety or, things like that. But I think doing the unconscious work, because obviously Pisces is related to 12th house energy, house of undoings, it's the unseen. So it's definitely going to be a time of, if doing maybe hypnosis or EMDR, like things like that are somatic as well, like getting into the body to heal trauma. And I think also, if you're interested in looking into your ancestral roots, like and healing a lot of that trauma, because, obviously a lot of our trauma is intergenerational, so I think that this, especially because this is Pisces and it's like it's encompassing all of the 12 signs essentially, so it's like I think we'll see that a lot of collective trauma is coming up to be healed. So it's not to say that it's going to be hard, I think, to work through this, but I think the rewards, once you do the hard work, you will really reap the benefits if you put in the effort and energy. So
Right. And this is so important because this is wrapping up another 30-year cycle. So by the end of February 2026, we're going to have Saturn moving into Aries, and we're going to start anew as a society. So we need to do this work. Like, these are our 2 years to clean up our messes internally, spiritually, externally, to support one another, to look into our past, our ancestry, even past lives, if that's something that you believe in, and kind of clean up all those messes and really get situated with ourselves spiritually, so that when we reemerge into 2026, when we're laying this kind of new foundation, we are very much attuned to what it is that we desire to create, without all that shadowy stuff getting in the way or distorting our image of what we really need as a society. So these are going to be really 2 significant years for us. And I think it's also going to be a time in which many of us, I think, will work on those shadows, specifically around wherever we might have a lot of like fear or anxiety or insecurity or doubt, which is just what Saturn just inherently brings. So especially where you feel like fearful of things that are out of your control, those things can really be brought up a lot. Like, if everybody decides to stop accepting cash, for example, and only use digital currency, or if everybody decides as a collective to move in one direction or another, it kind of impacts you, and you're going to get swept into the tide. And there is some level of like powerlessness in that, that can feel kind of scary. Or, yeah, I think there could be situations, I'm not saying that that specifically is going to happen, but there can be situations where you just kind of realize your smallness, where you don't always have a say in everything. And I think Saturn in here is going to help us see what we do and what we don't have a say in, and what our personal power and control is versus not. And the art of surrendering and trusting in the divine unfolding of life, and relying on maybe people of like-minded community, especially with Pluto moving into Aquarius, to act as that support system when things might feel like they're a little bit out of your hands.
Totally. I love that you just mentioned that, because that is one of the points I wanted to make, is that I really recommend, if you have a friend who's going through this transit as well, to I had a friend who had her Saturn in Aquarius. I think it was at like 4 degrees, and mine is at 18 degrees. And so it was really wild, because as we were, I met her literally at the beginning of my Saturn return, or our Saturn return. And her and I joke all the time. We're like, it was like the universe put her or us together, because it was like, she was my Saturn sister. She really understood what I was going through. And so I really recommend that. Like, find yourself a buddy, find yourself a friend who's also going through Saturn return, because especially like if you meet someone who is going through it a little bit earlier than you, because it was really wild. Like, everyone's going to have a different experience, but it was almost like things would happen in her life, and then like 6 months later they were happening in mine. And it was like her Saturn return was kind of like guiding me to realize what was about to happen to me. So I really do recommend that. Or find someone who has already gone through it, who can help to guide you. But I really do recommend, like, don't try to go through your Saturn return alone. It is very isolating in some degrees, especially Saturn and Aquarius natives. Like, we went through the pandemic with our Saturn returns. So I think we all deserve a little pat on our back. If you have Saturn watching this, congratulations that you completed it and survived it, because it was definitely really, really hard and super isolating. But I recommend finding a buddy and just staying in contact, and like, help each other get through it, because it's going to be challenging. But I think if you have a friend, you won't feel so alone.
Awesome. So we have 30 minutes to kind of hustle. So do you want to kind of just very briefly touch on what each sign can expect? This is specifically Saturn moving into Pisces. So wherever you're having Pisces is that area of life that we're kind of pointing to in your chart. So we're going to go over this for all of the rising signs. Yeah. Okay. So Aries rising, Pisces in the 12th house, Saturn moving into your 12th house. This one's funny because it's not funny, but I had a client who had this, and it was almost like to the day that Saturn moved into her 12th house. This wasn't in Pisces, but the same energy. She was hospitalized because the 12th house has to do with hospitals and things that are kind of separated from society. And Saturn does tend to also create that feeling of kind of being exiled. It is the ruler of Aquarius, traditionally. So it definitely has to do with that feeling of being separated. So there can be, I feel like, some more aloneness happening for some of our Aries risings, that doesn't have to be the case. This can come out in many different ways. We're going to mention a number of ways, but that is one of the ways. You might feel more internal, or like you might feel on a soul level drawn to take care of more of your spiritual world, like to take more time out for yourself, or to have more spiritual practices, or maybe you're physically or mentally need to work on something within yourself that can kind of remove you from your everyday hustle and bustle.
Yeah, and I would also say don't be afraid to rest. When you
Yeah.
have a 12 transit, you'll probably feel a lot more introspective and internal, or even introverted. So obviously, it's not to say to rest for 2.5 years, but like if you feel really tired, lean more into that and just make sure that you have time for reflection and meditation are going to be huge tools for you. And honestly, maybe even if you're into doing like hypnosis or getting like a past life reading, I think those would also be really helpful for Aries rising.
Yeah. And I think that, oh, we went to start with Pisces. Whoops.
So
I totally forgot. Okay, we can do Pisces next. Um, so
going on.
the 12th house also inherently, I feel like, has a lot to do with the same topics as Pisces, around like not being in control of things. So there might be some certain situations that things are removed from your life, or things are really changing. Cause I really see the 12th house, especially Saturn moving through here, as this kind of cocoon metamorphosis where you are like dissolving and then you're going to reemerge when Saturn goes into your first house. And so in many ways you might be like, this is part of why going within, having time alone, doing that spiritual work is so necessary, because you are physically, you look the same, but like on the inside, you're going through this whole dissolving and cocooning process, which in many ways is having you detach and surrender from what you have been so used to in your life, so that you can be stronger, you can be new, basically. So trust the process if things are leaving, trust the process if things feel scary or out of control, that it's leading you to your highest divine purpose. And to not try to like grip onto things, because it's going to make that transition harder than it needs to be.
Totally. And the last thing I would say is just know that you're alchemizing your pain into your power during this
Mhm.
transit. So
I
it's all going to work out. But yeah, just lean into it.
I love that. Okay, maybe we can just do the opposite sign. So now we're going to talk about oh wait, that's not the opposite sign. That would be Virgo. I mean, anyway. All right, let's talk about Pisces. So it's the one right next to it. um we meant to start off with you, Pisces. I'm very sorry. Because you're always last. We wanted you to be first, and then I fucked that up. So now you're second. Better than being last. So Pisces, Saturn is going to be moving into your first house, which is obviously really significant. So, do you want to start off, or should I?
Yeah, I can start off. So Pisces first house is all about your body. So now is a time that you might feel like you're really wanting to pay attention to your health. Maybe it's a time where you start to work out or detox. It can be a time where your identity, you're really kind of like stepping into your identity in a deeper way, or maybe even questioning your identity. And so the first house is like really interesting because it's honestly, I mean, I find as an astrologer, it's really hard to describe. Would you say that too, Courtney? It's like there's so much happening with your fourth or your first house that I feel like almost anything could
Yes.
happen.
I always say that. I'm like, it's kind of a catch-all, because the first house is you. So it's almost like any area of your life uh is going to be affected by this.
Yeah, and I think also your self-confidence, because again, like your sense of self. So I do think that you might have some hardships, but it's because it's trying to Saturn wants you to do the hard work in order to gain that self-awareness and self-confidence. So I think that those are big themes that you'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a few Pisces friends, and what I've been noticing for them is that I feel that they are in a state of moving into more of a leadership role, and they're needing to kind of own certain gifts of theirs to see the fullest expression of who they were meant to be. Maybe that they leaned into some sides of themselves and not others growing up, and now it's their time to feel like I need to fully develop all of my gifts, all of my talents, the things that I have been fearful of showing to the world. And so when Saturn moves into your first, I feel like it challenges you to do that in really big ways. So this could look like getting a new job, or finally studying something that you've always wanted to study, or coming out to your family, or having just really big shifts in the way that you perceive yourself, the way that you represent yourself. And that's because that's very much the first house. Like, how are others looking at me? What's my brand? If I'm a business, as a person, like what's the aesthetic, the brand, the style? And then also with our physical body, I would just be a little bit careful, especially if this is your second, I guess never mind. I was gonna say second Saturn. Oh yeah, though. Yeah, if you have Saturn in your first house. Anyway, if you just have maybe any indications of having some weird health things going on and Saturn's moving into your first house, definitely check that up, because there can be some chronic things that could develop, or some things that have chronically been there that you haven't noticed until now, that are like coming to the surface a little bit more, especially because Pisces energy can be a little bit more elusive and kind of disguise itself or hide itself. So, yes, obviously a good time to work on your health, but also to just getting more checkups and being really aware if everything is functioning properly, if you are eating the right things. But this could also be your mental health and like how you view yourself, how you view your body, how you view your life and your confidence, which is really what you were mentioning. But it can't be any area of your life. So,
And one other quick thing I want to mention. So my partner has this placement, and I thought this was wild, but like literally the day of his that Saturn ingressed into Pisces, he found out that he was going to be an uncle. So like your title may
yes.
change some way, like identity, your role in relationship to others, and
Yes.
learning how to set boundaries will be really big for Pisces rising.
Ooh, so, so big. And boundaries with yourself as well. If this is like, I've always allowed people to say or to do this, or I've done this to myself, like this is your year of being firmer in every way possible, physically, mentally, boundaries, energetically, and showing up for yourself. Okay, we're gonna have to go a lot faster. You just stop on the dot, right? Or a little bit before.
I have a little bit of flexibility, so it's not like if
Okay.
we go to like 45, that's fine. So yeah, I'll try to go faster.
Okay.
Um,
Um, So let's just do Taurus next. So 11th house, Saturn in your 11th house. Well, this is so much fun. I'm just kidding. I think it could be really fun. I actually just had it wasn't the same transit, but I had Mars in my 11th and Saturn opposite that one. That was such a bitch. I like lost friends. I was always having people, I feel like, be angry at me, or there was like always so much like just shit going on in my relationships. And I felt like that was such an area that was easy for me before that. So sometimes Saturn moving into 11th might draw out the the feeling of either being alone, if you are alone, or the feeling of being dissatisfied with relationships if they are not really soul relationships, or if you feel like it's kind of like a pruning process, but if you feel like you have found really good people, those relationships can become stronger and a closer, tight-knit community. But that area of your life is definitely coming under scrutiny.
yeah, and I've also seen too, like for natives with this placement, so yeah, Saturn in the 11th house, you may be someone who growing up didn't really have like a big friend group, or maybe you had experienced bullying, but
Mhm.
once Saturn matures, I think that's when you're gonna meet like your soul sisters or your soul friends. And so it might be a time where you're kind of like purging friendships that aren't, again, boundaries is gonna be a theme. So if there's
Mhm.
friends in your life, like they're not meant for you, or they're not in alignment with like helping you to reach your hopes and dreams, I think those people could kind of fall away, creating space for new friendships. And then also another theme, I think, is online, like networking, because the 11th house can also rule social media to some degree. So maybe if you were like a spiritual entrepreneur, like putting yourself out there more could be a theme. But I
Mhm.
do think the friendship thing will be huge.
Yeah. And I think also if you have always desired more of a spiritual community of friends and you've settled for not having that, I really could see that feeling like it's not emotionally fulfilling for you. And you're really starting to see how you differ from people around you who aren't living that same kind of path. And you might go through this longer journey of discovering who those people are. And then
Yeah.
working with friends as well, like you said, networking, but also online, but also in person, having relationships that can be mutually beneficial. There could be some bumps or some effort to get that, but I think it could help you grow and establish your desires, like you said.
Yeah. And one more really quick point, humanitarian efforts. Like I think that will be really big. So if you are switching jobs or wanting to volunteer, like those could be things that actually bring your soul a lot of fulfillment too.
Yes.
So don't shy away from that.
All right, fellow Geminis.
Ooh.
This is moving into your 10th house. So this is going to bring that level of seriousness into your career, obviously. The 10th house, like you were mentioning, how your boyfriend is now an uncle or going to be an uncle. The 10th house has that kind of status update or um, public persona update as well. So it's like, okay, are you getting married? Are you having some kind of public image change that people will notice and recognize within you? And that could look like advancing in your career, or that could look like, having certain challenges in your career. Sometimes Saturn can be both. It can level us up and bring more effort and more responsibility, or sometimes it can take things away.
Yeah, I noticed too with my clients, like people that are natives that have this placement, um, you might almost feel like in the beginning, earlier stages of life, that you are working so hard. You could be an incredibly hard worker, and then all of your peers are somehow surpassing you, and you're like, what the
Mhm.
heck? Like, why am I working so hard? And
Mhm.
everyone else is getting raises and promotions and like climbing the ladder, and you feel like you are not as accomplished. But once Saturn starts to mature and you go through your Saturn return, it's like those are the lessons you're going to go through. And then I think even though this can be a very challenging placement to have, I think the rewards out of all the other ones, like you will reap a lot of financial and like your reputation. You'll have like a high regard in society, like do something that is really well noted or known. So I do think that even though this is probably a really one of the most challenging, I think the rewards that you'll gain after Saturn matures are going to be really great.
Yeah, I definitely think that this is a house that calls you to think long term about what it is that you're trying to have in your life, very physically, very materially. Like, what kind of career do you want? How much money do you want? How many kids do you want? And thinking about the step by step process of how to get there and being realistic. If you've been kind of pie in the high sky, like dreaming, it's time to ground yourself a little bit in those practical, tangible steps without losing sight of that vision.
Mhm.
Okay, Cancer, ninth house. So, how would you perceive this?
You are probably going to go back to school or something with your education or maybe travel. So I have the third house placement and I did go back to school, but I didn't go to grad school. I went to more of like trade. Well, I studied astrology and holistic health coaching, but I think sometimes with ninth house placements, like you might do a master's program or grad school or even move abroad or move somewhere in general too. So I think it's big on philosophy and mindset as well. So it could just be major shifts in regards to your mindset as well. But I do think education is going to be a huge pull for you guys.
Yeah. I also feel like our ability to expand and grow as people, like the ways that we typically expand and grow is like, oh yeah, we're traveling and learning about ourselves, or we're going to school and we're learning about certain subjects. But there's also, of course, like non-traditional ways of growing as a person. And I feel like as Saturn moves into here, it's going to have you challenge the way that you see yourself and try to make that a little bit bigger, but it might try to do that by initially making you doubt if you can have more, if you can be bigger. Um, and again, kind of push outside of your comfort zone. The ninth house is like very much reaching for adventure and for something new. And it also creates a lot of inner wisdom. That's why traveling is so key here, because you learn just so much about life and about who you are. So I think with this next 2.5 years, you're going to gain a lot of wisdom and insight, not only about yourself, but about yourself when interacting with the world. And I think that's the key here. And then also, if you're ever interested in being a teacher or disseminating certain wisdom, so let's say you're not at that early phase of learning about yourself, but you're at the phase of, I've learned it, now I'm here to share it. That is also like the phase 2, I think, of Saturn moving into your ninth house.
Totally.
Okay, Leo rising. Saturn is moving into your 8th house. Do you want to start off or do you want me?
Sure. Yeah. So this is one of the more malefic houses, but I don't think that that's not to scare you or anything. I think that during this transit, you guys could get really interested in occult practices like tarot, astrology, things like that, spirituality. So it is. I've also seen with clients with that natally have this, that maybe you fear intimacy, or your parents were not very emotionally available for you. And so I think during this transit is when a lot of healing can take place in that regard. So you might be learning to really heal your emotional wounds or wounds around intimacy.
Yeah, it's funny because my boyfriend's Leo rising and he's about to move in. And I feel like that's a very intimate, experience, sharing space with one another. And I'm not sure that I mean, he has had that before, but yeah, I can see that. I can see that playing out in people's dynamics. Like how much can you let people in and what's in the way of that? And Saturn, when it first ingresses into your 8th, you might feel like things can come up that really point the mirror or the light at where there's all that gunk of and tar over your heart of like, no, I can't let that in. Um, and it can really challenge you to go through that kind of phoenix where you run into the flames of that past wound and that past experience to transmute the energy, which is very much 8th house. And I also think that there could be just very practical things in regards to, taxes, like estates in your family, inheritance, shared resources with your partner. There could be a need to be more mature and wise about how you go about those matters for your future. So having a will in place, for example, or having a prenup or a contract in place if this is something that you're doing shared business with a partner or something along those lines. So just kind of being more thoughtful about not only how you manage an energy and emotional exchange, but also like a physical monetary exchange with those around you. And also sex. So you might have a little bit more um, I mean, obviously sex is related to intimacy, but you might be a much more aware of physical limitations or things that have kind of stopped you from doing the deed or having a good sex life. Okay, that was super awkward, but I think you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I would say for oh, and maybe yeah, like seeking advice or counseling therapy could be a really
Yes.
good thing to do during this transit as well.
Yes. And I will just say, I think insecurities, fears, anxieties, kind of trauma, crises, those things from the past might feel like they're a little bit more present, which is why therapy is going to be super important. Okay,
Mhm.
Virgo, this is entering into your 7th house of relationships. So, are you Virgo rising? I can't remember. Oh no, you said you're a Sag.
What
Okay,
are
I'm Virgo.
okay, yeah. You want to take the lead?
Sure. So I definitely feel this because, like I was saying, when my Saturn return started approaching, it's in Placidus in my 6th, whole sign in my 7th. So I definitely felt that question of like, is this a long-term relationship for me? What do I want in a partner long-term? What does that look like? What does it look like to commit to somebody and work through something together? And this doesn't even have to be a romantic partnership, but this is just any type of relationship where you are close with that person, or multiple people, and you start to think about the foundations of that relationship dynamic. How have I been showing up to my partnerships? How have I been showing up to my friendships? Am I the kind of person that I would want to be with or be friends with. And kind of really addressing maybe long-standing issues. If there have been fears or issues in that area of your life, facing those head on, and just getting more realistic and practical as well. Like I definitely have a lot of clients who have very kind of idealistic, romantic energy in their charts. And I think Saturn moving through your seventh house can make you more grounded, more aware of like all of the person and not just like the honeymoon phase. A lot of people will go through more commitments, like getting married or divorce, like so kind of committing to one path or another when they enter in a stage like this. And if your relationship, if you've been in a long-standing marriage and you find that your relationship is challenged and you feel more emotionally disconnected from your partner and you have this transit, just know that this is part of the way that your relationship is actually going to kind of pull apart to come back together a lot stronger. And if you do break apart, then that was maybe meant to be. But if you can hold out through these next 2.5 years, if there are certain challenges and you make it through that, then you're going to be so much stronger as a result. And it's a really key process in a lot of relationships where when they go through some type of Saturn transit, they kind of see what the relationship is really made of. So I think many relationships can go through some up leveling or change to see like, does it have what it takes? And if it does, it will be there. And if it doesn't, then it won't.
Yeah, and also to add, I've seen with clients who have this natally, sometimes there's delays with relationships. So like you might be someone who didn't start dating until like later 20s. And so if that's the case for you, or even later in life, I find that oftentimes people with this placement, once they go through their Saturn return, that's when they meet their forever partner. So I think that this is a really, it's, you could potentially have breakups, but also sometimes it's like marriage can be an indicator too once you've gone through your Saturn return. And I will say that like a lot of times, Saturn is like staying power. So the person that you end up with, like they might be your life partner, and maybe you have delays in the beginning of your life, but you're the kind of person that only gets married one time, and it's like that's your forever person. So even
Mhm.
though there's a lot of challenges and delays, know that you'll reap the benefits too later on. So
And not to be pessimistic, but Saturn also teaches us the art of how to do things alone, wherever it is in our chart. So if you natally have this in your seventh, not a transit, but natally, it may be possible that you're not necessarily meant to be super reliant on a relationship. Maybe there are ways in which you are meant to be alone, and you're meant to learn how to rely on yourself. And maybe it's not until that happens that you'll find someone. And if you don't, then you might not find someone. So it's not to say like you're going to be alone forever, because that's definitely not the case. But there are some people who might not have that a part of their journey, and they learn to be okay with that, and they actually learn to be a lot happier that way. Um so yeah, it's just, I think if Saturn's moving through your seventh and you have that there natally, you might have some kind of like interesting marker where you're learning something around your independence within a relationship. That's not going to be for everyone, but some people.
mhm.
Okay. And then Libra, this will be in your sixth house.
Yeah, so themes of work, health, routine, your day to day. I think now is a time to create a ritual. If you don't already have a ritual practice, it could be as simple as like having meditation, or whatever you like to do to work out, but just paying attention to your day to day. You could have promotions in work, or maybe you get fired if you're, or laid off if it's, or you quit if it's not a job that's in alignment with you. So things that aren't in alignment are definitely going to fall away, especially in regards to work. You could have conflict with coworkers to some degree. But yeah, I would say the main thing is just like making sure that you're paying attention to your health. So like maybe getting checkups, or um, starting some kind of fitness routine or diet that's really helpful to, just make sure that you're focusing on your health and the longevity of your health.
Yeah. The longevity is super important. Like, I think the act of sustainability within woven into our everyday routine is super important here, because
Mhm.
Pisces, like Saturn can, like I mentioned, can work really hard to the bone where you develop chronic illness. But Pisces wants things to flow and feel easy. So how can you have some balance of in between that will again last you in the long term. So not only maybe I'm not going to work out an hour and a half every day, but a 30-minute yoga routine every day might be more doable for some people. So just kind of thinking about how you can manage things into the future. All right,
Yeah, and
Scorpio. Go ahead.
I just add one more. I also think that this could be a time where if you're thinking about a career transition, a career in service to others is
Mhm.
something that your soul might really feel called to at this time. So if you're doing something that's not really in alignment with your purpose, if you find something in service to others, I think that you would feel a lot more fulfilled. Okay, let's
I
go to
love that. Scorpio, fifth house. Saturn is transiting through your fifth house. So I think I just completed this. I noticed that when Saturn moved into my fifth, I was like all about those hobbies. I was like, what is it that makes me a well-rounded person? Like, what do I want to pursue that is super interesting to me? And it happened really naturally, even as an astrologer. I wasn't like thinking about this, it just happened. So I started picking up these different things that I felt like just brought me a lot of joy and wholeness into my life. And if I had children, I'm sure this would really impact that area because the fifth house rules children. So if you have kids, you might start to think more seriously or long term about certain issues in regards to them. So, where do they go to school? How do I parent them in this particular way? They're aging. How is this affecting our relationship? So those kind of topics can come up, and then also areas around dating as well. So if you're kind of just on the dating scene, like, am I gonna still sleep around? Maybe I'm getting older and I want to be more realistic or set certain standards or um have it be more of something that I'm taking seriously rather than something that I'm like, oh, I'm young and I have so much time. So you'll start to notice that you kind of shift into taking the things in life that are joyful. You're taking them a little bit more seriously and looking at them through a more mature lens.
Yeah, I think also another point would be entrepreneurship. So if you're wanting to start a business, this could be a really good transit to do that. This was also, I think I mentioned her before. I had a client who she's going through her second Saturn return, and she was Scorpio rising. And when I'd asked her about her creativity or her creative passions, she really was so not connected to it. And so if you're going through your first Saturn return, definitely pay attention to this and like really dive into your hobbies, into your creative pursuits so that, once you reach your second Saturn return, it's not so like such a big thing to feel like you have to just now start to dive into your creativity like later in life. I don't really think that's as much of an issue for our generation, but it kind of made sense. And then another thing from like a personal perspective, so I mentioned how my partner is becoming an uncle. Well, his mother, she's also going through her Saturn return. It's really funny that they're both going through it at the same time. And she is becoming a grandma. And so
Mm,
children, so it's just funny. So maybe your
yeah.
title will change in that regard too, with kids in some way.
Yeah. And I guess just to tack on with the creative element, I think that also extends to any of your innate gifts, like things that you really truly haven't explored within yourself that have always been interest for you or that have been maybe something you were interested in as a child that you've neglected. Those can be things to pick up now.
Mhm.
Okay. Do you have time for the last few?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Sagittarius, Saturn is moving into your fourth house. Oh gosh, I also went through this one not too long ago. Um,
About going through this now.
you're
Yeah,
going through this now?
this is my transit now.
Okay,
Well,
okay. I would love to hear if you've been feeling anything in particular.
Um, I think just I've really been wanting to make my space nicer, like
Mhm.
buying air quality. Like I just got a really nice rug, and kind of like purging things out of my space. I had just signed my lease before, so it's kind of like dabbling. Do I want to stay here? Do I want to not? I've also been feeling a very strong pull towards my family and kind of just the responsibilities of just being more engaged with my parents because my parents are getting older and I've had some recent deaths in the family. So things like that. It's just like very Saturnian. It's kind of a heavy transit that I haven't even gone through it fully, but I'm feeling it that it will be very maturing in regards to family, ancestry roots, like maybe you'll buy a home during this transit, maybe you'll move, sell a home or have to move back in with your parents to help support them if you have like parents who are sick or going through something like that. So Yeah, I feel like it's a very sobering, like this one, and it feels also very private too, because fourth
Mhm.
house is, your private sector. So, um, yeah, I can't really share too much because I'm just now,
Mhm.
you know, getting into it, but that's sort of what I've already been feeling.
Yeah, I moved during this transit to go I had a breakup and I moved in with my brother, got a lot of support from him, had to process a lot emotionally. And I feel that because the 4th house is such an emotional house, we do a lot of deeper digging and exploration around how our family kind of influenced us and made us who we are and how our past has shaped us. And you start to kind of work through maybe some of the baggage that you could hold on to. It's very similar to the 12th and the 8th house, where if there have been like difficult familial experiences or childhood experiences that you've gone through, I really feel that you take the time out to reflect on them and work on them and do things around them. And that's why you're often put like family and home become more of a focus. And that's you might be put around them more because you're meant to kind of work on, oh, this person always triggered me. Why is that? Like, let me work on that. Or what is it about my childhood that makes me feel this way about certain types of people? And those are just like two small examples, but I definitely think the sobering element is very true, and the withdrawing element is also very true because you are kind of going within and to examine those things, and that always requires a little bit of hermit mode. And I think I also bought a house when this was happening as well. So definitely investing in what you want for your future and how you kind of lay the foundations for maybe having a family one day, I think is really a key element here.
Mhm.
All right. So, Capricorn, Saturn is moving into your third house. Um, my friend is a Capricorn rising, so if you're watching this, hey. I think Saturn moving into your third house really, I mean, first of all, Capricorn, Saturn is your ruling planet. So it is going to be, I think, a more familiar experience for you to have the idea of like, getting serious and sobering up about something and taking responsibility. Like you already kind of innately do that. And so what I'm actually hoping for you guys is that it will help you come into more of like a freeing mindset, like freeing yourself from maybe some of the pressures that you're always kind of holding over yourself. I think Capricorn energy can just have really high standards, really high expectations for themselves, desiring for things to be done really well, or working super hard, taking responsibility for a lot of things. And I think that Saturn moving into more gentle sign of Pisces might actually affect you in a way where maybe at first your certain thought patterns get brought up again that are kind of a little bit more restrictive or are a little bit more critical. But at some point by the end, I really feel like this is going to help you surrender to the more gentle, compassionate way of speaking to yourself, and not having to be perfect and not having to like do everything 110% all the time.
Totally. Yeah, I just went through this. So my natal
Oh,
transit, I have
perfect.
Saturn in Aquarius, and so in the third house. And I will say, it was a time where I was really felt disconnected from my siblings. So you might find
Mm,
that as well. I actually am really close with my siblings, but because of the pandemic, I didn't see certain siblings for almost an entire year or longer. Um, and like Courtney said, it's also a time where your mindset is going to be really pulled into question. Like you're going to start to see if you have negative patterns that you have to learn to overcome, or to just kind of be kinder to yourself in a lot of ways. It was super isolating, but I think again that was more for the Saturn and Aquarius people. I also bought a car at the beginning of this transit, so you might have things come up with travel or cars. And then also, I went back to school, so it might be a time where you go and learn something again. It doesn't have to be traditional. It wasn't for me, but even if it's just a hobby or something like that, it can also be a time where you're starting to put yourself more on social media. I know that was the case for me as well. I was doing a lot more with being online and sharing. And so it can be a time where you are teaching others in some way too. But yeah, it was Saturn in the third house. I would say it's really just asking you to master your mindset so that you can have more success in that regard. Because I think that your mindset, when you have Saturn in here, it can be really challenging and you can be kind of prone to being a little bit more pessimistic. And so that's kind of why I think now that I'm out of my Saturn return, I've really just wanted to be more positive and keep that as part of like the forefront of who I am as a person, because it's hard to be positive, but it's equally hard to be negative. So it's like you gotta pick your poison. So yeah, I think you'll see that mastering your mindset is a really big theme.
And I think also when I had Saturn in my third or transiting my third, I was also really isolated. Like I was working on an online business, like all day, all night kind of thing, like just in my little apartment. Even though I was traveling, I self-isolated. And so I think that there's something about that because the third house is about our movement from one place to another, and Saturn tends to limit that. So even though you might commit to buying a car and things of that nature, you might actually take certain trips and so forth. But I also think that you might also go through a period of self-isolation because that is how you work on your mindset. Like you're not with a bunch of people like I'm working on my mindset right now because or communication. If you have had like breakdowns in communication with partners, with friends, if you said things that you don't mean, I think you'll really start to see that the power of your words and how that affects people for the better or worse. And I think those things can kind of go under adjustment as well.
Yeah, I think the isolation piece, like I just want to kind of talk about that a little bit more because again, it was the pandemic, but I spent, I think, a time period of almost 8 months where I literally was not around like anyone. I was definitely self-isolating to like kind of an extreme level, but I feel like I really needed to go there. So if you are going through this, don't be afraid to spend a lot of time alone if you need to. But I also think, reach out to others and don't totally self-isolate, because I think what I learned from this transit is that again, it was like I swung way too far. And I mean, I'm not kidding. I was working from home. I live alone. And I have a lot of friends that are more like all over the world. I feel like I communicate a lot. Like, I mean, even with you, Courtney, like
Yeah.
we live in places. And so a lot of my friends weren't in my like physical, they weren't close to me physically. So just make sure that you are still having, connections to humans, because I was so isolated that I think it kind of was not good for my mental health. And I'm now like going through the complete opposite where I'm like being way more social. So it can be very isolating. And I think it's important to have time alone to heal, but just don't get too extreme with it.
Yeah. Okay, last but not least, we have Aquarius. So Saturn is moving into your second house. So I really feel like the second house is a very survival based house. So having Saturn move in here, it can kind of trigger those fears around lack, not having enough, not having enough money, not having enough also like personal power in terms of creating that money, or like, oh, I have the skills that even if I lost everything today, I could make it all back tomorrow, or I could get a job, and like that sense of worthiness, confidence, feeling in control of yourself. When Saturn moves into here, if there are, things that aren't going well here, if there are weaknesses here, those will really be drawn to your attention. And it can almost, because it's so survival based, I feel like it can kind of trigger a little bit more fear. And yeah, I think it's helpful to be a little bit more wise with our finances and think long term and act cautiously, conservatively, because you are in kind of clicking more into survival mode, and doing those things I think will put you at ease, and it's purposely here to help you set up for a more diligent kind of future in terms of your resources so that you can plan for things long term, and feel safe.
Totally. I literally have in my notes, save your money, restrict excess spending. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a sobering time, especially kind of where we are in the world right now. It's not to scare anyone. I have seen natives with this placement, after their Saturn return, they become insanely financially successful and abundant. It's a time where you could learn how to invest really well. So it's like investing in your, not only just like resources and finances, but in yourself and your sense of self. So I think like this is a transit where your personal value system is going to be questioned. And if you're not valuing yourself, other people can't value you.
Mhm.
So you have to learn how to put yourself first and value yourself and set boundaries in regards to, you know, like especially too with money, like if you're not getting paid enough, you need to like speak up for yourself
Mhm.
and really honor what you are worth.
Yeah. I also feel like knowing what you bring to the table, having confidence around that, which is what you said in other words, but I think those words are important because the second house is where we see what we are offering the world. And it's like, I'm willing to vouch for that and not settle, not and demand what I deserve. Oh, there's also something else I want to mention. Oh, independence as well. The second house can be extremely self-reliant and independent. So I think that as Saturn moves into here, it's asking you to look more at how you can rely more on yourself, not ask for as much maybe handouts if your family supports you or if you've been getting loans, for example. It's like, how can I do things more on my own? How can I see where to find that abundance? Instead of saying, oh, I can't do that. Like actually let's think about all the possibilities and ways I can make this happen for myself. And sometimes people might buy a house or they might have a really big life-changing event like having a kid. I've actually noticed this because it changes your financial life so much and it changes what you feel like you are now offering to someone in that exchange of value. And so you might notice that those things really shift in your life as well.
Yep.
Awesome. So I know that you have to run. So where can people find you and what's your social media? What readings do you offer? All that jazz.
Yeah, so my business is Lua Astrology. So it's Lua, astrology.com. And I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram. You can find me there. And I actually have a Saturn return reading on my website. So if you guys are really interested and want support, that's actually the bread and butter of what I do now. I'm super excited to help guide you guys through this, especially since I've just went through it. And so I really know and I understand what you guys are going through. So if you want support, feel free to check out my website. Yeah, I'm so excited to connect with you guys. And thank you so much, Courtney. This is amazing.
Yeah, I had so much fun. I wish we could talk for 6 hours. But we'll have another video. There's so much
Totally.
left to discuss. Thank you guys so much for staying tuned. Don't forget to comment down below, give us a thumbs up, and let us know if you have any questions. Christina and I will be happy to answer. Don't forget to follow her as well, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.